Well, Sister Mary Ellen, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us. Could you just briefly tell us again who you are and uh, what organizations you're affiliated with?
I'm Mary Ellen Howard. I'm a Sister of Mercy. I'm a nurse, and I'm a member of the Detroit People's Water Board. I am a native Detroiter, and for 20 years, I was director of Cabrini Clinic here in Detroit, which is a free medical clinic for uninsured people. I'm
So,
retired now, and I'm available to get involved in advocacy work in the city.
um, we're really interested in this notion of water security and water insecurity. What do those terms mean to you?
Uh, the term water insecurity means to me that you're not sure when you turn on the tap whether there's going to be any water there. Or you've received a notice from the Detroit Water Department that your water is going to be shut off, and you're not sure whether you can get the bill taken care of. Um, the I think what to me, in my experience with folks here in the city, water insecurity hits children more than
Mm,
adults.
hmm.
Adults kind of understand what's happening and know how to work the system sometimes or get help, or but kids don't know.
Hmm.
They don't know. They just know that their clothes are dirty, that they smell, that they're not able to flush the toilet, that mom doesn't know where she's going to get water to fix dinner or wash the dishes or do the laundry.
Hmm.
So I think it's, in my experience, it's harder on children.
Hmm. Um, when you think about water insecurity in Detroit, in particular, um, what are some of the major burning issues that you see around you? Is it primarily affordability and access, or are there other issues that you see as really unfolding around us?
The whole uh, situation around water insecurity in Detroit really mushroomed during the bankruptcy.
Hmm.
Detroit, uh, Governor Snyder appointed an emergency manager to run Detroit, and that emergency manager, who was a bankruptcy lawyer, declared bankruptcy. I
Hmm.
mean, that's what he does. So he declared that the city was bankrupt. I don't believe that that was necessary, but that's another that's another story. Anyway, when he did that, there were two major assets that the city of Detroit had. One was the collection at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and the other was the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department,
Hmm.
both of which are worth like $1 billion.
Hmm.
So he took a look at those two major assets to put them in order and to get an evaluation of them, because he thought he would probably have to sell them all, totally or in part, to settle the bankruptcy. So when he looked at Detroit Water and Sewerage, he saw that a lot of people had outstanding bills, and he um, ordered 150,000 shutoffs in the city of Detroit.
Hmm.
And I want to say, although other cities also shut off water when people don't pay their bills, the scope of the problem in Detroit really drew national and international attention. Uh, Now, 150,000 people didn't get their water shut off, but it was over 100,000 have had
Hmm.
their water shut off since that. And this was in 2014.
Hmm.
So uh, the big issue in Detroit is I want to say can I just pause for a minute?
Sure.
Detroit's surrounded by the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes hold 20% of the world's fresh surface water. The world's 20% of the world's fresh surface water. So we have plenty of water. We have one of the most sophisticated water treatment programs here in Detroit in the world. And so we have the ability, we have availability, and we have the ability to provide clean water to people. The problem is affordability. And poverty in Detroit is well documented. The Alice report, which was a major study of poverty in Michigan, it looked at the working poor, and they estimated that in Detroit, 67% of households working, where there was someone working, were not able to afford their basic needs, including their water bill. So if you haven't got the money, you haven't got the money. And affordability definitely is the major roadblock here in Detroit. And the price of water keeps going up, and it's a very complex story behind that, but people are just poor and they haven't got the money. Now that's part of the problem. There are other problems related to why people can't pay their bill. One is landlords. Here where I live, I don't pay my water bill. My landlord pays it, and I pay it in my rent. So every month I pay my rent, the landlord pays the water bill. If my landlord stopped paying the water bill, my water gets shut off, even though I've paid every month. And that's happening to a lot of people in this city. The more, we have people in Brooklyn and California and China are buying up properties here in Detroit and renting them out, and they're absentee landlords, and if they stop paying the water bill, people get their water shut off. And then I've counseled people to go. They'll tell me. I went down to the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department to tell them what the situation is with my landlord, and they say, that's not our problem. That's a landlord-tenant problem. You need to take that up with your landlord. We need to be paid, and your water's not going to be turned on until we get paid. So that's another issue. The other thing is, I want to say that the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department they're notorious for being incompetent. And their bills, many of the bills are not correct. I once got a bill for $1,000 for 1 month's worth of water. And I called them up and told them I didn't have a swimming pool. And something was wrong. So, and I got it fixed. But other people these days who call up and say, this bill can't be right, they say, oh yes it is right, and you got to pay. And you can't become part of the assistance program. You can't tap into the DWSD RAP program unless you say, I accept that the balance on my water bill is correct. You have to sign a document saying that. People won't do it. So it's very complex, but it's all around affordability. And again, I could say more about affordability if you want.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate you outlining the complexity of the situation over there. So please tell us a little bit about how you've been involved in advocacy for water security. When did you first start getting involved? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a water advocate?
Well, I mentioned that I was a director of a free clinic for uninsured people, and many of our clients at Cabrini Clinic were low income or very poor, and not infrequently we'd have somebody come in the front door and say, my water's been shut off. And they were telling it to us because, of course, that affects your health.
Mm-hmm.
And I come at this whole water issue as a public health nurse. I got involved because I'm concerned about the public health of the people in the city of Detroit. So I first started becoming aware of it at Cabrini Clinic. And I actually had a student, a master's student, who came to spend a summer with me from the University of Pittsburgh. And I gave her that as a project. I said, I want you to find out what's going on with the water shutoffs in Detroit. How many people have their water shut off? What does it take to get your water shut off? Is there any help? I want you to find out everything about it. So she kind of educated me. I sent her out on a mission, and she educated me about the issue. And she actually used that for her master's paper. So that was not too long before I retired. And just at the time I was retiring, it was around 2014. It was in May of 2014. And Reverend Bill Wiley-Kellerman, who is another water advocate, tapped me on the shoulder and said, Mary Ellen, we're going to protest next week against the water shutoffs in Detroit, and we want you with us. Will you come? And there's a good chance we're going to get arrested. Would you be willing to do that? We need you. So I said yes, and at that point then I kind of jumped in with both feet, and I was arrested that day, and I became very involved with the Detroit People's Water Board and trying to get clean, affordable water for all the people of Detroit.
Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned that your initial entry into this was as a public health nurse, but I've also noticed that there are a lot of faith-based organizations and actors involved in water insecurity. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you see faith-based actors and institutions involved in this issue?
Well, from the perspective of Christianity, I might say, which is my religion, um, and as a follower of Jesus, he said, I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. And as his follower, I need to take those words seriously. And the Catholic Church has a long tradition of social justice policy and theology and activism, and I am very much involved in that also, and bringing the message to the church. Shortly after I joined the People's Water Board, it was actually Lila Cabell, one of the founders of the People's Water Board, who decided that we needed a faith outreach committee. And Lila put that together, and our basic purpose there was to do outreach to the community, but in particular to churches where we felt we would have a sympathetic ear about people going without water, and in particular children and families. So, and that has been true. I would say I frequently do presentations in the city, and I would say about half of the time it's at a church of whatever church or temple or synagogue,
Mm-hmm.
one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the faith community doesn't want to hear about people suffering without water.
Mm.
And they're willing to rise up and do something and get involved. And that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already got a sympathetic ear. There always will be people out there, however, who say, well, if we give them free water, who's going to pay for that?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to talk about our obligation to each other, the moral obligation that we have to ensure that everyone has water, that we have what we need to live. And so a good part of our outreach has again been to churches.
Do you think your faith requires you to be a staunch advocate of water access and affordability?
My faith certainly does speak to that. I don't know if you'd be interested, but I have a little quote here from Pope Francis on water poverty.
Mm.
He says, access to safe drinkable water is a basic and universal human right, since it is essential to human survival, and as such is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. Our world has a grave social debt towards the poor who lack access to drinking water, because they are denied the right to a life consistent with their inalienable dignity. This debt can be paid partly by an increase in funding to provide clean water and sanitary services among the poor.
Mm.
So that's the direction in my church
Mm-hmm.
that we receive on what we need to do about making sure everyone has water. And as I said earlier, in other countries and even other parts of the United States, there's a lack of water, and it might be because the water is contaminated, or it might be because there's a drought. But that's certainly not true in Michigan. We have no excuse, and we have every capability of making sure that people have clean, safe, affordable water, and we need to do it.
So when you have so many different people from so many different faiths together, can you talk a little bit about um, both the uplifting elements of that collaboration? As you know, to be honest, I'm sure there's a few challenges as well. So can you talk a little bit about that process?
Well, I work with people of many different faiths on the People's Water Board. I could name them. And they really have been a blessing in my life. And they opened my eyes to what their faith calls them to. And it really is enriching. Um, Detroit Jews for Justice they have been just phenomenal in the work that they've done for us, organizing work. They come in ready to ready to do whatever, and they've been just fantastic. The Unitarian Universalist Church, where we meet all the time, has been very United Church of Christ, on and on. The Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, they're all involved. We have clergy involved with the People's Water Board from those faiths, and they're the leaders. Really, they're just wonderful people, and of course that's very meaningful to me too.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the specific programs or activities that you are involved in presently? I know that's probably a lot to cover, but what are some of the major things that come to mind right now?
Yeah, right now, what are the People's Water Board? What are we focusing on? We've got World Water Day coming up March 22nd, and a lot of our attention right now is getting ready for World Water Day. We're going to we've traditionally headed to Lansing on World Water Day and done a legislative visit, and we do a lot of work legislatively. We have model legislation at the both at the federal level and at the state level that we're promoting, and it really helps to go and visit the our legislators in Lansing. Some of them very supportive, and others slam the door in our face. So we've gotten used to both responses. The other, so we're going. We usually go on World Water Day, but this year World Water Day is on Friday, and the legislature isn't in session. So we're either going to go Wednesday or Thursday to see our legislators, and then on Friday we're going to have programs both at the African American Museum and at the Science Center, which are right next to each other in downtown Detroit, and they're collaborating on this World Water Day with us. At the African American Museum, we will have programs and panels and discussions and films and whatever about issues related to water, and in particular water affordability and what's happening in Detroit. And at the Science Center, they will be looking at more family-related issues like conservation of water, like recycling water, like conservation, and what does it take to provide clean water? Those kinds of things that are more scientifically oriented. So that's probably our major focus right now, but we work on all kinds of things all the time. I just gave a talk last week at the Solanas Center, and I listed some of the things that Detroit People's Water Board is involved in. And let me just mention a couple of them. We're calling on the mayor to end shutoffs and restore service. We're asking him to implement the water affordability plan. We're trying to prevent privatization of water all over, and keeping water as a public trust. We're doing direct action. We're really, many of us were involved in being arrested in Lansing during the Poor People's Campaign, and here in Detroit. We actually stood in front of the queue line and stopped it. We got arrested for stopping the queue line. It was Happiness Is. And those, why do we do that? Because it draws attention to the issue, and that's important. We have a water hotline, and I have served on the water hotline. I've answered the phone and taken calls from people who have had their water turned off. We have water stations where we provide water to people, direct service, on a short-term basis, and then we try to help them get their water turned back on. We deliver water to homes too, because a lot of people don't have a car, and here in Detroit, and the transportation is the bus system, and how many gallon jugs of water can you carry on a bus? One? I don't know, I find it hard to carry one, but there you are. We work closely with the United Nations. They have been here to visit us, and we have been to the UN in New York and served on panels there. I spoke on the value of water at the United Nations, and they're very supportive of the work we're doing here in Detroit. We've filed lawsuits against the city on behalf of people that have had their water shut off. We're asking for decriminalization of those who turn their water back on. Right now, that's a 5-year felony. So if you turn you've got children in the home and they've turned your water off, you can go out. Those keys are available that turn the water back on. So people get a hold of one and they'll turn their water back on for their children, and they end up with a 5-year felony, 5 years in jail. We're promoting state and national water legislation. We have held 3 conferences, international conferences, on the human right to water here in Detroit that have been just wonderful. And we've had people from all over the world come and look at what we're doing here in Detroit and share with us their situation regarding water insecurity. We do research and data, collect data on, as we can get it from the city, on water shutoffs, education, media, and cultural work. And for fun, we have a singing group called the Flowtown Review. And I'm a member of Flowtown Review. We have taken Motown songs and put water lyrics to them. So I'll give you a little taste of one of the songs. Stop shutting water off before you kill us all. Stop shutting water off before you kill us all. Turn the taps back on, turn the taps back on, turn the taps back on. So in the midst of all of this depressing situation of people without water, you have to have fun too. And sometimes that can be a very effective way of getting our message across too.
Yes.